I read a book by Martin Gross called National Suicide, and he makes the argument that government keeps growing because the government is so big and complicated that even most members of Congress don't have any idea how it really works. There are so many agencies and bureaucracies that even an ambitious new senator will have a hard time knowing where to start. Where do you propose to start?
A good place to start would be with those departments that don't need to be eliminated. I say that somewhat facetiously, but it is helpful. I mean, I think we can agree on the fact that we don't need to do anything to eliminate the Department of Defense. We shouldn't be eliminating the Department of State, the Department of Justice, and there are certainly a few others that we could think of that are completely appropriate exercises of federal power. Department of Veterans Affairs, I think, is completely appropriate. There are others like the U.S. Department of Education that so badly defy any sound principles of a limited federal government that we can fairly look at those and say, well, we need to start moving toward eliminating them.
What about like when you just get into all the little smaller agencies within a bigger agency and the little programs and I think in the book he cites that there's over 80 different welfare programs and they're all administered through like 4 or 5 different federal agencies, and it's just such a boondoggle to find where one ends and where it begins. And where does the senator go to just actually just say, okay, it's time to undo all this. Let's pass some sunset clauses. Let's end some of this.
Oh,
where do you? I mean,
I was going to say this is an argument that calls out for a law that requires all federal programs, perhaps all federal programs outside of defense and a few other high priority areas, all other federal programs out to sunset automatically every 5 years or 10 years or something like that, such that those agencies, those programs would have to come back to Congress asking for renewal of their right to exist, and otherwise justify their ongoing right to exist on a regular basis.
You tend to cover many of the conservative platforms regarding immigration. However, at some point, the Immigration Act of 1965 is going to need to be updated and revised. Determining who can legally immigrate to a country is a process that is always inherently discriminatory. If America is to give priority to a certain type of immigrant, what factors should determine what kinds of legal immigrants we should invite to our country?
Employability, likelihood of we got to consider each immigrant's ability to obtain and retain good employment, to obey the law, to take care of that immigrant's self and family, and bring needed skills into our economy.
So you think it should be primarily economically based on economic need?
I think if we're going to prioritize, if as long as we're buying into the argument, which I think as a country we have, that we can't have an unlimited number of immigrants coming legally into the country every year, then we need to come up with some sort of a rational basis, some sort of rational approach toward deciding who gets to come in and who doesn't. And those are factors that I think ought to come into account, ought to be taken into account. Now, there are other factors as well, certainly. If you're married to a citizen, I think that's a no-brainer. If you're married to a lawful permanent resident, that's probably going to be a strong factor as well. Other family concerns as well. In part because those things will tend to, if you're married to someone who's already a citizen, that by itself suggests that you might integrate well into our society.
So if we've broken this out, we know that there's some sort of potentially an economic factor that comes into play, potentially the ability to assimilate is something that should be considered.
Yeah, and then there's the sort of the
human portion of it that deals with family relationships and things like that, the need for families to be better.
Would you consider language to be a factor?
Perhaps it ought to be. One could certainly make a very strong argument that it should be, because that there would be that would correlate to a significant degree with one's ability to earn a living.